And great. So, well, people are still joining moment by moment, but let me just begin. And as I'm talking, more people will join in. But well, to begin with, as I think most or all of you know, I'm Jeremy Lent, and I'm really glad to welcome you to this month's Deep Transformation Live Network meeting. And I really just want to kind of channel the fact that this has been a very, very traumatic month, really, I'm sure, for all of us. And I'm sure everyone here today has been feeling, along with me, the grief, the deep grief, and perhaps rage or something like that, as we watch this genocidal violence taking the lives of thousands of innocent people and children in Gaza, and so little being done to put a halt to it in our mainstream world. And I feel at times like these, it's really valuable also to take a temporary break from the unfolding news events and ask some bigger questions about the underlying causes. Like, what are the systemic structures that have set the conditions for such horrors that to be occurring right now? And as some of you know, I've been doing research for the last year or two for a book on what a life-affirming civilization, an ecological civilization might look like. And an insight that repeatedly struck me as I've been doing this research goes basically like this: the system isn't actually broken. It's in fact doing exactly what it was intended to do, which is basically extract resources from all of life as efficiently as possible and suck that wealth and power to a tiny, powerful elite away from most people. So, which is why it's not enough just to try to fix a few things, but to change the entire system. And of course, this system has been has developed like a set of rules underlying it that maintains its grip. And those rules have a name. They're called the legal system. And, you know, most of us, which included me until I started this research, didn't ever really think much about where law came from. It's like one of those things like money or language that just seems to sort of happen and exist naturally. But in fact, when we really investigate more deeply, we see that this legal system was designed from the earliest times to lock in wealth and power of the elites, and that's been its primary function ever since. And what I'm so glad about is that there's an emerging group of real visionaries who've begun to explore what an alternative, life-affirming legal system might look like. And that's why I'm just so excited to have this opportunity today for us to explore that with three of these legal visionaries, to explore what it might mean to re-envision law for an ecological civilization. And so we're going to be joined shortly, in just a few moments today, by Janelle Orsi, Dr. Margaret Satya Rose, and Alex May. And that's what the core of today's session is going to be about. But before I introduce them in more detail, just want to have us turn towards our own network. Because this meeting is our monthly opportunity to build our own unity as a global community, to meet each other, build our social cohesion, and get inspired by hearing about what others are doing, and build the collective intelligence together that we need if we're going to shift this civilization's trajectory. And to help us build this cohesion, we're going to start right now going into breakout groups just for 5 minutes, just to meet each other and build a heart connection. And after the panel discussion, about half an hour, 40 minutes or so from now, we'll actually rejoin the same breakout groups for another 10 minutes for a more deepening conversation. So right now, let's go into these breakout groups. And I just wanted to remind you, there's just going to be time really just to share your name, where you're joining us from, single sentence, whatever, about what's in your heart, mind right now, or maybe something that you're wondering about today's session you want to ask the panelists about, or whatever. And hold space for each other, please, and make sure everyone in your group gets a chance to be heard. And remember, you'll be in the same group later on, so you'll have more time to share with each other. But let's, if we can join groups now. So welcome back, everyone, to the main room. And now that was just such a lovely way to start that connection, which we'll be able to build on when we go back into the breakout groups in about half an hour or so. But this is our opportunity now to get to meet and explore more from our wonderful panelists today. So maybe if we could bring into the spotlight Alex, hi there, Alex May, Janelle Orsi, and Margaret Satya Rose. And let's wait for Margaret to join. Hey there, Margaret. Great to see you all. Thanks all so much for joining this panel. And before we go into any one-on-one conversations or anything, I just wanted to say personally, I've had this incredible pleasure to get to meet and know each of you in various ways over the last few years. And it was actually something, I had a dream really for a while now to get the three of you in a space together to actually share some of these ideas, because each one of you has inspired me personally in profound ways. And I always felt what an incredible dream team this would be. So it's kind of like a dream come true for me today for this to happen. Maybe let me turn to you first, Alex. Just by way of a really brief introduction for people, Alex is a legal theorist who's been thinking about transforming our legal systems towards a just and ecological society. And I first came across Alex actually a few years back when I read his amazing essay, Interconnected Law, a paradigm shift in legal thinking. And in fact, perhaps if someone can actually put a link to that essay in the chat, that would be great if we haven't already done that. And because when I read that essay, it was like, I went, great. Here's somebody who really sees how things can be different, like just from the foundations up. And Alex is currently in the PhD program at the University of London. He's a researcher on rights of nature with Lawyers for Nature. And so Alex, let me turn to you and maybe just explore a little bit this kind of core idea that I understand that you start from, which is basically that science is relational and humans are deeply intrinsically connected to all of nature. And so if we want to really look at re-envisioning law, we need to start from that basis. So maybe you can tell us what you mean a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And that's exactly right, because when I'm working within kind of among lawyers and within legal theory, you have to start by thinking, well, how do we think about the world? What's our worldview? And usually that takes a bit more explanation, but you've written a book about it and many people have already read it. So the idea is that before we start to think about law, we have to think about the world that law is in, and we have to think about law as being part of our society. And various different disciplines have different paradigms for understanding things. And our legal system, as with our political systems, at least those of us in the global north for the most part, and our economic systems, they're all very individualistic. The first thing I always try and do is to point out that actually society is all about relationships, that the relations that we have, whether it's our kind of intimate relationships, family and close friends, through to employment relationships, spatial relationships with your neighbors and the municipality and so on, and ecological relations, all of those relations are the world we live in, and we have to think about the world in that way. And then after I kind of set out that idea, I then say, well, now we have to think about law in that context. And it totally transforms how we think about law, because the mainstream way of thinking about law, like I said, is just not that at all.
So what are some examples of what would be a foundational difference in our entire legal system if it started from that basis that we're basically relational, we're not separate individuals?
Yeah, I think I'll try and remember to give 2 points on this. And the first one is to touch about kind of nature and ecology, which I haven't spoken about as much yet. So kind of once we understand that we live in an ecological world, both our society is within a wider nature and as individuals we are, we should think about what that should mean for law. So all of these basic ecological needs and relations that we have, clean air, clean water, temperatures that we can survive and so on, we need to think about how law can safeguard those. And there's two parts to this. There's the kind of anthropocentric, how does law safeguard the conditions that we need to live? How does, and that would mean kind of various rights that you might set or legal regulations. And also it's about having the idea of sustainability as just core to your legal system, that one thing that your legal system must do is keep the society sustainable, because otherwise it undermines the conditions that we need to live in, and it will be terrible in many ways, as we're experiencing. And also then there's the ecological side of the kind of non-human benefit, which is to say that our legal system should also protect the natural world from human destruction, which is of course currently failing to do.
Yes.
And then the second example I was thinking is away from the nature side, though it's a false separation. Currently, our legal system is very much based on individualistic rights. For the most part, at least in the UK, the USA, and other Anglo-American countries, it's all about, this is what I can demand from the legal system or from someone else.
Yeah.
And once we understand that the world is actually relational, we understand that everything in our society is something we have to create together, whether it's against each other antagonistically or more hopefully cooperatively. And if our legal system started to think in terms of relationships, then it changes things. And it instead would be, you pick a particular topic or a particular thing, maybe you talk about freedom or education or whatever, and your legal system says, well, what are the relationships that we need to cultivate so that people can realize those things? And then how does the legal system cultivate those things in society?
Yeah, love that. And I remember in your article, there was a profound sort of concept that really helped to shift my understanding of what could be possible on exactly that sort of way of thinking about relationship with, what about this idea that maybe all, like right now we have things like property rights and legal rights. And when you own something, you're considered to be the absolute sort of tyrannical owner of that. I mean, they even used back in the 17th century or something, or 18th century or something, some lawyer talked about the owner of a property as the tyrant of his own property, sort of thing. I mean, they were proud to use that idea. But what about if we started from a different foundation that said rights must come with responsibilities? So like that, not to say you're not allowed to have property rights, but what about if property rights actually, it gave control over some property, but subject to responsibilities? And then obviously the question would be, well, what are those responsibilities? But that changes the whole dialogue, right? So I know you had similar ideas to that, Alex. So I don't know if you want to add any more thoughts on what kind of responsibilities that might be for property rights. Or
I was nodding along thinking, oh yeah, you said it excellently. But no, it's part of it comes to, it starts kind of that point with the critique of saying, well, currently it's all about rights without responsibilities, and it shouldn't be like that. And property rights is a great example. Corporations also have rights without responsibilities, but even human rights, the basic human and constitutional rights, are usually rights without responsibilities. So if you if you have the right to bodily autonomy, you also have the responsibility to respect others' bodily autonomy. And if instead that our current legal system has the rights part of that down, but much less about the responsibilities part, or at least in a collective sense, that's simplified. A lawyer will hear that and say, no, obviously not all of the legal system is the responsibilities that match rights, but kind of taking a step back at the meta level, that's what's coming first. And yeah, with property rights, I think ultimately the current approach to property rights of domination of the land and the property with no responsibilities needs to change. But the kind of shorter term step to get to the bigger change that we might need is to say, well, okay, currently you have this property, but let's have some responsibilities. And that, to kind of simplify two parts of that, one would be the responsibility ecologically to other non-human beings that also are involved in that land. And you could start with a kind of a basic idea that the ecological status of your land shouldn't degrade. But you can go further and say, actually, it needs to have a kind of restoration type approach.
Right.
And then you can also talk about social responsibility. So say someone owns a large property, there could be a question of, well, this property has to be used in a way that is socially beneficial. Providing a home is socially beneficial. If you're a business, perhaps the way you have to run your business should make sure that it is a socially beneficial way of running the business instead of being a business that degrades the society it's in. Yeah, I think that's what I can think of for that.
And yeah, and you know, where my mind was going, and so if somebody is a property speculator and they buy different properties, then obviously there, and if it's in an area where there's a housing shortage, then you'd have a responsibility for that to be rented out at some fair market value rather than just held for speculation, things like that. So there are so many examples like that. And then, like you say, with corporations, that would then give the fundamental logic to something like a triple bottom line requirement, because of course you shouldn't give a franchise to a corporation to exploit unless they're actually paying back, giving something back. So yeah, I think that's one of the most foundational ideas. Thanks for that, Alex. And let me turn now to Janelle and to Margaret. And I did want to say, just by the way, speaking of rights and responsibilities and caring for oneself, in fact, Alex has been dealing with long COVID, and I really appreciate, in fact, Alex, that you're up so late at night in England right now, because he's dealing with real exhaustion. So part of what he's doing to look after himself is go off camera when he's not actually speaking, so he can just rest a little bit more. But he's here and will continue to be here and able to answer questions too. But let me turn now to you, Janelle. And Beth, just by way of introduction, really, Janelle has been spending many years of her life really kind of in the weeds, if you will, actually working on trying to turn some of that theory of law being interrelated, but actually turn it into practice. So Janelle is co-founder of the Sustainable Economies Law Center here in the San Francisco Bay Area, where I live. And that's a cooperatively structured nonprofit. And that really facilitates the growth of sustainable and localized economies through different things. I think you do: education, research, advocacy. But Janelle's also author on a book on practicing law in the sharing economy, and a cartoonist who amazingly applies her creativity to making some legal ideas understandable and fun. And Janelle, it's great having you here. I was first introduced to you by my partner, Lisa, who's holding a salon about another organization, part of yours, East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, maybe we can talk about, and Sustainable Economies Law Center. And it's just been incredible since we've gotten to meet. And you've talked to me a number of times in conversations we've had about coming up with very specific ways in which law stops those interrelationships, stops that heart-centered way of relating. And you've been thinking about how we can actually make law do the opposite. So I'd love you to tell us more about some of your insights about that. They're just so great to hear.
Sure. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I've been a lawyer now for 16 years. And when I started, I wanted to be a lawyer for sharing and cooperation and for the creation of more collaborative, loving communities. And I feel in many ways that I stepped into a trap by assuming that law would be the tool that I would use to help create more loving communities. But I had just graduated from law school, so that's kind of how I was thinking. And a lot of what I've worked with over the years are cooperatives in all kinds of sectors: worker cooperatives, housing, energy. And to me, the heart of a cooperative is very simple. It's like people coming together to take care of one another and to just figure out infinite ways of doing that. Like, cooperatives can take infinite shapes. But what I stepped into is a legal system that puts cooperatives, all those infinite shapes, into boxes. And so what I became was an expert in cooperative corporation law. Many people don't know there's specialized entities just for cooperatives. There's a specialized tax category just for cooperatives. And I thought, well, that's perfect. I just need to help people fit into these existing legal structures. And in many ways, I was excited just at this idea of, like, corporations, we can rearrange them infinitely internally and re-engineer them for justice and equality, right? And so I was very optimistic for a long time, but just a few years ago, I started to get this feeling in my chest that maybe what we're doing, putting people in these boxes, is actually disrupting the heart, the love, the inspiration that brought people together to cooperate to begin with. And I just started feeling very allergic to a lot of the very same legal tools that I've used. And I just dropped it into the chat, a slideshow. I'll just drop it one more time because I know there's a lot happening in the chat of just a lot of writing and videos and cartoons I've made about how I've really shifted how I practice law. And I've been leaning toward basically centering what I feel is sacred, which is the creative, loving impulses of humans coming together, like putting that at the center and then shaping the law around it.
Yeah.
And I'll just pause there to just sort of say that's been my journey with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing just how creative you've been, and not just creative, but deeply creative, looking at those underlying layers of that separation. So I know, like, you've talked to me at times about how you'd have maybe like some trust, or people wanted to put some land into a trust, and then looking at the legal rights and responsibilities that would normally be looked at. But your insights that I've understood is, what about if you actually almost like let that all go and let the heart-centeredness and the relationship become the almost like the defining part of the relationship, rather than let it be defined by law? So I don't know if you want to describe that a little bit more. I probably didn't describe it quite as well as I should.
No, you said it very well. And I think it's always a balance, because I'm not throwing all law and legal structure out the window, because law and our legal system, as far off course as it has taken us in our society, I do feel like there is something sacred at the core of law itself, which is just like, I picture humans locking arms and saying, we want to protect each other, or we want to guard each other against these harms. Like, that's what law is, and that's sacred. It's really not going well, but I want to get to the heart of what law can do for us, which is protect land, permanently protect land from harm, protect people. And so, it's really just a matter of kind of doing it in balance, and with clients, although I'm going to stop calling them clients soon. That's another story, is like, I actually want to give up my license to practice law so that I can inhabit the law in a different way. But with the organizations that I work with, a lot of them are land-based. I think what it comes down to is just continually returning to what matters and noticing, when does law kind of get us off course? We start to think that all these boxes we have to check, all these spreadsheets and forms are what matters, and to just try to bring ourselves back again and again to why are we here and what's important to us. And in that way, we can balance it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the things I feel is that I've seen you do is really helping people to really get that sense that it's not like lawyers out there and experts and telling us what to do, but really like, I think you even say that almost like we can create the law together. And you even gave the example sometime fairly recently about how you're trying to explain to people about easements, right? And some idea of how an easement works. And then you actually created some sort of like a rhyme or something that like a song that people could then share to. So, I mean, it's like mind-blowing shift, like actually singing about law. And I don't know if I wouldn't want to put you on the spot. I don't know if you want to even like tell us what that's. Good. Do you want to just share it, or is that too much to ask?
Yeah. Well, I can just share that since I became a lawyer, I've actually, right after I became a lawyer is when I became a cartoonist, because I just thought we need to make the law as accessible as possible. I want the law to feel like it belongs to people. And I've tried so many ways to make the law accessible, but I do feel like I eventually hit a wall. And that's why I want to stop being a lawyer and just have myself and others inhabit a space where law belongs to everyone. I really do feel like law belongs to the people. And I don't want to be in a position to say there's some piece of the law that's just for me as a lawyer, but also to just recognize the blur between what is law and what is the rest of life. That's, completely a gray area. And that our court systems and statutes just may not be the strongest thing to protect us now and in the long term. And so I was with a group of Indigenous people and other allies a few weeks ago at a conference on land return, land back. to Indigenous people. And I was supposed to be talking about cultural easements as a tool for giving tribes permanent access to land. And I said, we can create these really strong legal documents and courts will enforce them as far as we understand. But what's stronger is actually, I think, a community coming together again and again and just reaffirming the intention. And I said, you can do that with songs. So we ended up writing the basics of an easement into a song to the tune of Row, Row, Row Your Boat and sang it in rounds. And I don't know, it was very memorable for people. It's just like to say, law is not the center here. It's our relationships that's what's going to protect us in the long term.
Love that so much. Yeah, thanks. And we'll definitely come back to you, Janelle. And let me turn now to you, Margaret. And it's wonderful to welcome you here. And Margaret, by way of a brief introduction, is the co-founder of the Future Law Collaborative, which is how we got to know each other, which is a path-breaking, global community of local futurists working together to basically catalyze the systems change at local and global levels. And what got me so excited about your vision, Margaret, is this notion of future law and this sense of this global community that can be out there to actually be part of this, this kind of re-envisioning. And just to conclude the introduction of Margaret, she's a senior partner at a law firm in the Caribbean, focusing on anti-corruption and public procurement law. And congratulations are in order to you, Margaret, I believe, because just last month, Margaret successfully defended her PhD.
A few days ago.
But so now it's Dr. Margaret Satya Rose. So congratulations. But what I'd love to hear from you is your idea of how to turn this visionary legal thinking into this more sustained transformative movement, to actually help it to really shift us toward that ecological civilization. So perhaps for starters, you can talk a little about what you've already done with that Future Law Collaborative and some of the webinars you put on and all amazing stuff you've already done on that, and then your vision for what that might do in the future.
And can I start a little bit about who I am and how I got into this in the first place?
No, that'd be great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Margaret.
So I've been practicing for the last 28 years.
Yeah.
Primarily in the Caribbean. In the last 11 years, I've been in the UK. And I just came back to Trinidad and Tobago. What got me into thinking about how do we transform the legal system started off, from where I was at in Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean, and looking at the ways in which we, in terms of how we framed our laws, we were basically importing laws from other countries, from the global economic governance system that we all operate in. And so we didn't have ownership and sovereignty over the way in which we wanted to govern ourselves. And so it really started off as a them and us sort of relationship that I had, thinking, we are being, this is neocolonialism, we don't want these laws and that sort of thing. And through anti-corruption and public procurement law in particular, I identified public procurement law as an area in which there was this policy export going on to global South countries that, imposing and promoting a framework of law that was not in the interest of global South countries. It was basically asking global South countries to keep their markets open. There was a decision already as to what is good law in that particular area. And so I started to specialize there and do work in that regard. It is when I came to the UK and I was living here that I began to see that there were so many shared tragedies and traumas that we were all experiencing because of the way the law operates.
Right.
And I really love Alex's article. And so that's why he was one of the people that I invited to be a part of the Future Law community and to share his work in a masterclass, because he seemed inspired by the work of well, at least partly inspired by the work of Fritjof Capra in a systems view of life, and Luigi. And that inspired me. I got onto their work in 2017. And very much like Alex, I would say, once we accept that that's the truth of the world, scientifically, that we are all interconnected and interdependent. I mean, it's a different ontological view of the world than what our old systems of laws, our traditional systems of laws were based on. And once we accept that, then to me, there's an obligation on us to recognize that the laws that exist right now do not reflect all of who we are as human beings and are in fact contributing. There's a causal a relationship between our laws and the effects that we're seeing in the world. And from the time I really started to grapple with that, I think I was focused on the question that I think someone asked in the chat. I'm hearing all these propositions, and propositions are good, but how do we create the change?
Yes.
Right? And that's where future law for me came in.
Yes.
Right? And what I found was an area for where we needed more integration was that legal systems are jurisdictional based. So the law and how laws change are based on a domestic system. Yet we are all sharing this planet. We are all experiencing common challenges. There are common public goods that we all share, and we are in the midst of common crises. And so if we were to wait for every single jurisdiction to change the laws in order, for example, let's take one example of, I think everyone in here, because we are all about an ecological society, many of us will say, okay, we want to have the law of ecocide on our books.
Right, exactly. Right.
You know, how long is it going to take for everyone to, to get on board with that? And what are the rules within each system that one has to go through to get those laws changed? Because yes, at the global economic level, at the UN level, we can pass certain resolutions, but the nature of our local systems are such that we will still need to ratify it and then enforce it within our borders.
Yes.
So the idea of future law was, what if we could connect from the ground lawyers and policy professionals, people who are interested in changing the world for better, to come together transnationally, develop network communities of practice in particular niche areas of the law, where, for example, we had an ecocide community of practice. And so in there, we would have leaders who understood and were specialized in the area of ecocide law, and had the whole, the philosophy, the theory and practice of how it should be changed. And then you could mentor lawyers and policy professionals from other jurisdictions and support policy entrepreneurship from the bottom up. And so that was the vision for future law. And we were thinking about this. I was part of a Global Challenges Retreat community that came together in the UK. Well, I mean, I was one of the founders of that community as well in 2017. And out of that initiative came Future Law. And we were in 2019 working on it, contacting experts to come and develop these network communities of practice, but we hadn't launched yet. And then in early 2020, we all experienced COVID-19, right? And March, it came about, and we weren't ready to launch, but we said, you know what, this is exactly why we think we need a community, a collaborative of lawyers and policy experts or people who want to contribute to changing policy on the ground, to be together at a transnational level, virtually leveraging technology, to be together, to inspire and to support coordinated action for change. You know, so we then we launched very, you know, I would say, I don't know if I want to use the word prematurely, But we weren't ready to launch, but we did. We wanted to bring lawyers together to start collating the COVID-19 policy responses, and we did. And so we had hundreds of lawyers coming together. We were collecting the policy responses, and we produced a paper which the UN published. And I changed my research project as well in my thesis, to a COVID-19 procurement research project based on the policy responses that we saw. So that is what I would say the vision of Future Law is. I went on sabbatical in January 2021. So we basically paused the work of Future Law. And I had told my community, when I'm finished the doc, I'll be back. So it's quite interesting that you reached out to me, because this is the first time.
Monica, I called earlier this day.
Okay.
Someone.
Sorry. No, so this is the first time I'm speaking in any public.
So in a way, maybe we can consider this to be the soft relaunch of Future Law Institute. Well, we'll have to
Q1 2024 is where I'm I'm looking at. Yeah,
I'm really looking forward to working with you interactively on that, because what I feel like you're doing in talking about this and actually making this happen is the very notion of what it is we need to move towards that ecological civilization in each of these different areas, which law is so fundamental, and other domains too, but actually set up that network of people working in those communities of practice, like you're saying. So I so appreciate that, and we'll come back, and because I'd love to still find out more about your vision of how that's going to unfold. But I feel now I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I want to make sure we give ourselves time for our breakout rooms, which is a really important part of our session today, and then time for other people to be asking you questions. And I noticed some people have already put some great questions in the chat. I'll try to weave some of those in the second half of our session. But it'll also be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions themselves or share their own perspectives or reflections at that point. But now let's go into those same breakout groups that we had before. And just as a kind of a couple of questions I invite you to consider, I just put in the chat as you're in those breakout groups, and is to first is, have you had any personal experiences yourself of how the legal system blocks that interconnectedness we've been talking about? And second, what inspires you in this conversation about how the law could be re-envisioned, that really comes alive for you? So let's those are just kind of kickoff questions as we go deeper. Just as a reminder, I would love to get a feel of the different flavors of our community. So I'll sort of, like a fly in the wall, I'll kind of hover into different groups for a minute or so at a time. If you do see me, give me a wave, whatever, but I'm not going to try to be part of the conversation, just really more like observing, just so I can feel into all the different ideas going on. So let's see each other back again in 10 minutes. And all right, well, welcome back to our main room right now. And well, I've been hearing so many amazing conversations taking place. I so wish we could just hold them all in some sort of multi-dimensional time zone or whatever. But I do want to let you know, before we come back to our full panel discussion right now, that we are offering now each month, and we're offering it on Thursday, a circle of practice meeting, which will be taking place, so essentially 2 days from now on Thursday at this time, which is really designed for a deeper dialogue of these kinds of topics, a time to explore sort of further whatever arose from today's session, and to actually take it to a kind of a deeper layer of practicing together with deep listening and integrating and anchoring. So I'm going to put into the chat, unless somebody's just done that already, where let me do it right now, where that's an event on our feed that you can join. And some of the co-hosts are going to be Sylvia and Naya and Galia and Sigurd, who some of you know. Really offers that's almost like a different kind of container, like a sacred container, where the tone and attitude allows something really nourishing to emerge. But right now, we're here in our present moment, and this is an opportunity that anybody has to share, right, ask any questions of three legal visionary panelists. Also, any reflections. I love these to be not so much about like Q&A, just like Janelle was saying, like, oh, these are the lawyers and we get to ask them the questions. But if you have particular other reflections you want to share yourself, we can begin to weave these together into building our own collective intelligence. If you feel a little uncomfortable being so public in being spotlighted, I mean, if you want to ask a question or share anything, please raise your Zoom hand right now. Like Sylvia just said, use the hands up icon. If you're uncomfortable about being too public, put questions in the chat. They're being sort of collated, and I'm looking at some questions already, and I'll try to weave some of those in. I can't guarantee all of them will get woven in, but I'll try to weave some into our conversation right now. But I see that Nancy has her hand up, and then Larissa. So let's begin with you, Nancy. If you want to join our spotlight.
Yes, thank you. First, I've been really inspired. I'm in Santa Cruz, California. I'm really inspired by what you're saying on all sides, and I'm interested in where law schools, bar exams, the extent to which new curricula, new requirements can shift practice around focusing on new kinds of cases and build the expertise, the background, the commitment, and the focus for the things you're talking about.
Great question. Who wants to explore that with Nancy?
I'd be happy to. I've taught over 1,000 students Earth Law over the last 3 years.
Oh, great.
In 60 different countries, and it's extraordinarily rich field for sewing. Young students in law schools and universities are extraordinarily willing to commit to.
For a second, TZ. We just see your name as TZ, and it introduces by your name. And if TZ could also be spotlighted too, just so you can be more a part of this.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Tony Zell, and my organization is called the Earth Law Center. And I really had finished my comments that there really is traction at universities and law schools and opportunities to educate students in relational legal frameworks and other aspects of Earth law, ecocide and rights of future generations, and of course, rights of nature. So yes, it's encouraging.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thanks. And perhaps you could share maybe on the Deep Transformation Network in a separate post after this, just share some more information about your Earth Law Center, as well as maybe in the comments to this feed. I think a lot of people would love to hear more about that. Thank you.
I'd be happy to, and I'll post a link. I think I posted the link to the book, Earth Law, and I'll post a link to the Earth Law Center.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great. So let's turn to Larissa.
Hi, thank you. I have a question, or maybe more of a comment for Alex. It makes so much sense. It's so obvious that healthy systems are relational and should be for the purpose of facilitating deeper and better relating. And one of the relationships that I personally feel is very important is our relationship to history, our shared history. And when you talked about, healthier legal systems, I'm assuming that you have looked at other kinds of approaches and models for justice, like indigenous ones, traditional ones, ones that are semi-formal and that were superseded by Western and colonial law. But you didn't actually mention that, so I'm just inviting a little further information on that.
Great, thank you, Larissa. And would anybody like to build on that? Oh, and Janelle, Margaret, and Alex, we should get you all off mute so that you can easily join in the conversation.
Yeah, I'm already off mute, so I'll jump in with a few different thoughts. There was the question about law schools. My quick answer is that one, that currently law is taught as if it's a system of rules to apply, and it's how to be a good applier of the existing rules. So I think law students have to actually be taught that what they're doing is reproducing a certain set of political values and social relations, and that you have to instead start to think about what you're reproducing, what you should be reproducing, and how you get there, which we heard that in kind of Janelle's story of how her practice has changed. And that also then part of, I think, the way that law should be working is almost like kind of mediation and therapy and social work to try and resolve conflicts in a transformative way that heals relationships and moves people forwards, instead of the current kind of antagonistic backwards way that is about fighting for who gets the money. And then, yeah, Larissa, completely agree, and thanks for adding that on. I think ultimately, because I think law should be developed bottom up instead of top down, instead of currently being this imposition, different cultures have to start to think, well, what are our cultural values, and how would we use some form of law, not the current legal systems and legal forms that we have, but some version of law, how would we use that to reproduce that? And I mean, often at low level community, like small groups of people, whether it's indigenous peoples, or if we go back historically in England, when you had commons and you had villages, law was much more about conflict resolution and how to resolve things as a community, much more about kind of the decision-making process as opposed to applying rules top down. And that kind of grassroots bottom up way of using law has been lost through the top-down imposition, whether it's been colonial internationally or the kind of modern liberal capitalist imposition on all of us. Well, those of us in those societies.
Great. Yeah, thanks for that, Alex. Just to want to add a question that was in the chat that kind of builds a little bit on Larissa's question, but in terms of they just kind of looking at the global system, like Larissa was touching into the history that brought us here. And Ben Levy asked, he said, one significant issue is that we have global issues and problems, but no global legal structure to solve those global problems. And I'm curious if anybody in the panel has any thoughts about what can be done to transform like the global system itself as well as national.
Well, we have the UN model law. We have the UN with their model laws and their conventions. We have the World Trade Organization, and we have the IMF and all of these, the trifecta of bodies that comprise our global governance system, right? And it's now being supported by bilateral investment treaties with courts being established outside of the national court systems. And so we are getting a whole parallel set of governance procedures happening globally. And this is the area I think that really needs, that I'm passionate about being a part of. How do we address the gaps that arise because of the global system that we are operating in? And I see it as the need for a bottom-up, non-state-led collaboration of people, where we learn, where very much you're doing the deep transformation network, where people are coming together and we are sharing and understanding and developing a shared ideology, a shared understanding of who we are together, that then provides a new normative structure for how we might want to influence and encode the rules that govern relations among us. And so I'm saying what the idea of what I'm trying to do is how then can we support individuals in each of their jurisdictions to become the advocates for the reform of the laws that would be aligned with what we've agreed to at a transnational collaborative such as this. And so Earth Law that is being taught by Tony, I think his name, I forgot his name. You know, if that, and it is happening, certainly with Earth Law, it's happening. But if we could come back to Larissa's question, because, you know, this issue of, you know, where does history come into play when we're thinking of, you know, ecological rights and that sort of thing. And one of the things that, you know, we felt very strongly when we founded the Future Law is we cannot be thinking of the future law only in the context of ecological crises and environmental issues that exist today and that pose impending threats. What about the current state of you know, many people all over the world that have been caused by the way the law has been used in the past, and how do we look at a just future and create a just future with that kind of historical past? And if we look at it from, you know, complexity informed, the systems lens, we will understand that a system doesn't just happen. It has a history, and history matters for complex systems. It creates path dependencies within a system. So if we want to create a just system going forward, we have to look back at the root causes that are contributing to the effects in the system that we are observing. And, you know, if we want to think about property rights and we want to think about, you know, how we started to get here in the modern world, we can't avoid thinking about the transatlantic slave trade when Black bodies were legislatively dehumanized and converted into property. And, you know, you were able then to get insurance. And if you look at the role of the transatlantic slave trade in the development of even property law, I think it's mind-boggling how the relationship and how significant the relationship between those two developments were. And so if you have a situation, we're living in a world where up to 2015, the slave owners in Britain were compensated, right, for the abolition of the slave trade and for the emancipation of the slaves. But no one wants to speak about, from the context of justice, what do we do for the descendants of slaves? And everyone thinks, oh, that's yesteryear, no one needs to pay for that. You know, then what are we talking about when we're thinking about justice and the future of law in the context of that?
Absolutely right, Margaret. Thank you. Really profound insight. And yeah, we need to just to add to what you're saying, like, and the reason why somebody who's in the global south now gets paid for a day's work like 1/9 or 1/10 as much as somebody for the same day's work in the global north, it didn't just happen, just like law didn't just happen. It's a direct result of global colonialism, of hundreds of years of this expropriation, exploitation. And so we have to look at that history and look at redistribution and reparations, not as something that, it's only fair or whatever, but as something that is fundamentally has to be done at the deepest layer in order to start again from a different systemic basis. Well said. Thank you, Margaret. And let's turn to Sandra, and then maybe Ray, and then I'm seeing that the time we're drawing to a close, so that might be all we have time for. But Sandra.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sorry I've had my screen dark and I've just had an operation, so I'm laid up. I'm a little bit like Alex. I'm really excited by the turn the conversation is taking, because as an anthropologist, where I've done my field work in North Sumatra, I've become acquainted with customary law, which is called adat in Indonesia. And there, it's very much a grassroots, bottom-up kind of legal system, where you see the law is actually co-created. Every time there's a dispute, people come together. Nothing is written down. Everything is an oral culture. And so when you have the two sides arguing their points, it's often done in a poetic fashion, and every issue has different sides. So they're using standardized phrases that have been developed over the centuries to show the different perspectives on a same issue. And then it's discussed, and the people surrounding it are the spectators. They have a role to play as well. They're commenting, they're saying yes or no. And at the end, what they are the they're the legal seal on whatever is decided. They are the collective memory of the group. And so that way you have nothing that's codified except in oral literature, and the dynamics of it can change with the change of time, the passage of, or the alternating, or the dynamics in the society. And so it's a wonderful flexible system. When the Dutch moved in, they came in with their more let's say monolithic system, unchangeable, and the two operated, and still do operate to a certain extent, at the same time. But I wanted to say also, in relation to what Margaret was saying, is that we can derive so much inspiration from Indigenous peoples and the way they have operated in a grassroots, more fair way to what should we say, construct systems of fairness within their societies.
Yeah, God, thank you for sharing that, Sandra. And I see Janelle, it almost speaks so much to what Janelle was been describing. And as Nay just asked, Sandra, if you could just put in the chat the name of that system, that would be great for other people to research. So let's close with Ray joining us, and then if it's okay for everyone, we'll stay around just a few minutes longer to close. So Ray, if you could keep it nice and succinct, just because we're
yes. Speaking of relations, our civilization is the ultimate super organism, and biological and civilizational evolution. Wouldn't it be wonderful to repurpose corporations as organelles to make Amazon like a circulatory system? I had more to say about that, but that's it in a nutshell.
I love that.
Love that too. Yeah, thank you for that. And that's the thing that's so hopeful about that idea of a triple bottom line requirement for corporations, that they might be psychopaths, but rather than human psychopaths, where you actually have to change you can't like change the DNA of a human psychopath. You can actually change the DNA of the corporations and actually repurpose them different way, just the way you're describing. So I love that idea, Ray. Thank you. And so with all these amazing ideas that have been floated, I just wanted to spend one moment, if we could just have almost like a brief haiku-like response from each of you about, with everything that's come up today, what is one next step that each of you would like to just ask the people who have been a part of this session today to focus on or put their time or energy into? So whoever wants to begin.
A haiku, okay. Ask yourself about how legal relationships in your life might be disrupting what your heart knows. Is it your workplace relationships and workplace hierarchies? Is it the ownership of your home? Is it the structure of your retirement savings? And how might those structures interrupt what your heart actually wants to do?
Thank you. Thank you, Janelle. Margaret?
Well, I'm blanking, so
okay.
Alex, you can go and I can come with something in the end. I'm not
Sure.
sure.
I haven't got it down to a haiku yet, and I also have ended up with two, but I'll keep them concise. The first is that we have to recognize that legal change follows social change, and that nice ideas won't change law without political struggle. It's the political struggle that cultivates legal change. And the second is, as a more of an action, is when we're thinking about legal change, we should think about the social relations that we want, and then think about what law that could cultivate those relations would look like.
Yes, I love that. Thank you. And Margaret, let me just leave a final word for you. So it doesn't have to be another step, but what would you like to leave us with as I thank all three of you for joining us today?
What would I like to leave those who are here with? That at the end of the day, we can all have these, we can transform our hearts and minds. We can transform the way we think about the world. But once we have laws in place that constrain the way we interact with each other and the way we connect with each other, I don't want to sound defeatist, but I'm not sure how far we will get unless we address the ways in which the law constrains our actions. And so that, therefore, what I would like to leave people with is, movements for change are important, but movements for change must grapple with the hard systems as this entire forum is about, that exist, and how do we identify those high leverage strategic intervention points and systems that we can all work together to change.
Love that. Yeah. Thank you, Margaret. I think that's crucial. The environmental biologist David Sloan Wilson talks a lot about how basically we don't need to become better as human beings. We just need to set the conditions for us to act pro-socially. And really, that's what the legal system is about, isn't it? And so shifting those conditions so we just act naturally as human beings together in a pro-social way. That's really what it's about. And so I really want to thank the three of you so much. This has been an incredibly inspiring conversation, I know, for lots of people, and for me too. And I feel my mind is buzzing with all the sort of interweaving of all these different ideas. And as I was saying earlier, this doesn't have to finish right now. We can have a follow-on on Thursday. And if we could just spotlight Sylvia for one moment to close us off, I'd like to ask you, Sylvia, if you could just give a little bit more of a highlight to people for what they could expect if they want to join the continued conversation on Thursday. Thank you.
First of all, I just want to say Thursday is an invitation. It's an invitation to really let everything that happened today drop more deeply into you, and let yourself see what arises, from that. It's an invitation for further dialogue. It's not an invitation to rehash. It's not an invitation to come and debate or be evaluative in the sense of, what did you really think about that session on Tuesday? It's really a chance to be in community with one another, to let surface what really resonated, to go deeper into inquiry with one another, to practice that deep listening, that integration, that wondering about how I can bring this more fully to life in my own community, in myself, in my web of relationships, to keep making meaning with one another and keep finding our way together. So that's Thursday, 10 o'clock at 10 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And there are 4 of us who will co-host, just in the sense of kind of hold that space, that circle for everybody, and everybody is welcome. Please come if you can.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sylvia, for that. And yeah, this is really what the Deep Transformation Network is about, is not just having one session where we get ideas and then move on and do something else in our lives, but weaving these into our lives, into each other's lives together. So thanks to everyone. Thanks to the panelists, all the people who participated in all the different ways for this session, and look forward to more together. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jeremy. Nice seeing you again.
Bye, everybody.